Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today my guest is Jim Mason. He is the president of HSLDA. He has written articles in the HSLDA Homeschool, Court Report magazine, National Review, Newsmax, the Sacramento Bee, and the Press Enterprise, and I'm sure many others. He is a board member and chairman of the Parental Rights Organization, parentalrightsfoundation.org, and you've been with HSLDA since 2001. Jim, you have won a $700,000 settlement for a homeschool client who had their children wrongfully seized by a rogue child protective service investigator. It's just always a great reminder that our freedoms are not free, that homeschooling wasn't legal in every single state until 1993, and a lot of that was led by HSLDA, and we must be always vigilant to keep our freedoms. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert.
Jim, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in homeschooling and advocacy for homeschoolers here in the U.S.
Well, I got involved in homeschooling before I even went to law school. My wife and I decided to homeschool our kids pretty early on. When our oldest child was about 4 years old, we'd made a decision to homeschool, and we went to this thing called the Writing Road to Reading, which was designed to help parents teach their children how to read. And then we started really getting plugged in. I was actually a parole and probation officer at the time, and we started getting plugged into the greater homeschooling community and started getting these articles from this little outfit in Virginia called HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, talking about the battles for freedom all over the country. I became pretty fired up about it and actually changed careers, had an opportunity to go to law school, went to Regent University School of Law with an ambition eventually to come work at HSLDA. I'd actually sent a letter to Mike Ferris before I started law school saying, hey, I've got good news. I'm going back to school and I'm going to become a lawyer, and then I'm going to come out and help you guys. And he basically wrote back and said, maybe give that a second thought. And so then after I graduated, it was about 5 years after I clerked for an appellate court judge, and then I worked for the General Counsel of National Right to Life Committee for a bit, and then an opening came up here, and I started in 2001, right before 9/11.
Well, I was in college then, and so I remember, of course, that time very well. Unfortunately, and it's definitely a turning of tides here in our country. You have 7 children, 6 grandchildren. I understand that some of them are in classical conversations. You've got a lot of experience homeschooling with your own kids. So since it's August and when this is being released, what are some maybe homeschool advice you have as a dad for those who are either starting their homeschool journey or trying to get back in the thick of things here in August?
Well, in my own family's experience, and as I travel around the country and talk to people, it's really important to have a community, I think. Don't try to go this homeschooling adventure alone. It's a lot of fun for the family. You do get a lot of time with your own kids, but one of the big strengths of homeschooling and the homeschooling movement for all these years is we've built this huge, organically grown, interconnected network of families who are kind of on the same journey, heading the same direction. And whatever kind of flavor of homeschooler you want to be, there's a group out there pretty close to you that will help you along the way. And the primary parent who's doing the organizing of the homeschool in many families is one parent or the other. I know both parents are pretty involved, but they need a lot of support. So if the mom is doing the homeschooling this time of year, she needs a lot of support getting started. A lot of just real, dads are so important in making sure that the family is really focused on this adventure together. And I guess the other thing, because I am with Homeschool Legal Defense Association, I would advise you, especially if you're new to homeschooling, to make sure you actually know what the laws of your state are. You may be surprised to learn that every state has some kind of law regarding homeschooling. And one of the things we've learned coming out of the pandemic, when a lot of people, came into kind of homeschooling, something of homeschooling, and maybe it was still. And during the pandemic, there wasn't a lot of attention to whether you were following the regs or the rules. And now it's important to know what the law of your state is. Some states require you to send in a notice. Other states have other things. So do check. We have state law pages for every state in the country at our website, and you can check in. Homeschooling has never been as free as it is today in the history of man, but there are still rules you have to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, one of the things I tell people, join your state organization and join HSLDA. But many people just kind of take it for granted that we've won these fights and, the statistics are clear. Homeschoolers are, doing well, and there's, no reason to be a part of these types of organizations. And I know that that's a bad narrative to believe. So tell us a little bit about, what does HSLDA do? There's a lot of different arms and different groups that you guys are associated with. What's the benefit? Why do we still need HSLDA now?
So, Homeschool Legal Defense Association started when homeschooling was either actually illegal, incorrectly believed to be illegal in some states, and pretty much disapproved of everywhere else, even if it was technically legal. And so, over the years, as homeschoolers, more and more homeschoolers entered homeschooling, the pressure on states was in the direction of freedom, and HSLDA was always right there. And the way we did that, and the way we still do that, is, as a member of HSLDA, if you have a homeschool-related legal problem, we will help you with it. And I'll give you one example, a recent example. This still happens today, right here in my home state of Virginia. There's a pretty reasonable homeschooling statute that the legislature passed. And a local school district a few years ago decided that it wasn't good enough for them. And so they adopted a local policy that added requirements to the homeschooling law. And you'd be surprised, that sort of thing happens pretty regularly. In most of the time, our lawyers, when a member gets a letter in the mail that says, "Hey, you may have complied with your state's law, but we need this additional information, or we need more paperwork from you," our lawyers sort that out pretty fast for the most part. But here in this case in Virginia, Kirks and Kristen Sosby got this letter and they said, "No, we don't have to do that. That's not in the law." And the school district said, "Well, we just passed this local policy, and if you don't comply with it, we will prosecute you." So that's when they got us involved, and we tried to dissuade them. We tried to persuade them that their actions were contrary to state law. They didn't agree. So we sued the school district, and we ended up taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court of Virginia. And at oral argument, the attorney for the school district was asked by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia, "So what is it that you're going to do if you don't get this paperwork? If we rule in your favor and they don't comply, what will you do?" And the attorney said, "Well, we'll turn them into CPS for educational neglect, or we'll prosecute them for truancy." And the Chief Justice said, "Sounds like it's not a child in need of your services. It sounds like a school district that needs more paper," which was a pretty good signal to us. This was during COVID that we had oral argument. The Supreme Court of Virginia then ruled 7-0 in the favor of our clients, the Sosbys. And that precedent, now no local school district in Virginia is ever going to do that again. And we've used that precedent in other school districts in other states to say, "Hey, if you persist in this foolish way, we're going to take it all the way to the top. We're not going to back down. And that's what HSLDA is. It's what we've been throughout the years, and we still are today.
Yeah, and I know every year some, really excited state legislators are always trying to pass new homeschooling laws, and you guys are on the ground rallying the troops, educating homeschoolers, and none of that would be able to be achieved without HSLDA there. And as the needs of homeschooling and homeschoolers have expanded, y'all have started, wonderful services. I know there's the Homeschool Foundation, which offers homeschooling grants. You don't necessarily focus internationally, but you've helped, launch some other HSLDA-like organizations in other countries as well. And so it's really this whole freedom movement. And I think
Right.
now more than ever, we need more and more groups involved in that.
Yeah, you mentioned, our involvement in other organizations. We actually were pretty instrumental in starting HSLDA of Canada, and I'm a board member there. We do kind of the same work there. The legislative work we do here in this country is extremely important. And if people ask, why should we join our state organization? Why should we join HSLDA? I'm traveling around the country this summer. I have 10 speaking engagements at homeschool conferences all around the country. And my topic is homeschool freedom has pretty much expanded near to the outermost limits in America today. It's freer now than it has ever been all across the country. But as you mentioned, the pendulums always swing, and every year there's legislation introduced to cause homeschoolers to be more regulated, and one of the things that's going around now is this stereotype, false appraisal that homeschoolers that homeschool freedom allows more child abuse. And
Right.
legislation is going to be introduced in West Virginia this year. The outgoing governor who's running for Senate, Governor Justice in West Virginia, just this week, as we speak, not as we are broadcasting, but by the time this is released, he has announced that there's going to be a special session of the West Virginia legislature to adopt more restrictive homeschooling laws. So the threats are real.
Wow.
They're going around, different states. HSLDA has a really strong and robust legislative work that we do in conjunction with our members and friends in every state, as well as in really close partnership with the state homeschooling groups in every state. So it's really important today, maybe more important now than ever, to be involved as a homeschool family, because really the pendulum has only one direction to go, and it's starting to head that direction, and that's in the direction of less freedom.
Yeah, and I know, states like Michigan, which has become a bluer state, and Illinois are states that are definitely looking at increasing homeschool restrictions and making it more difficult under the guise of, protecting the child. Even though you can look at any sort of statistics of school-age children in the public schools that they run and have, 8-hour supervision of them over, and it's not a pretty picture at all. But then it's also kind of surprising to hear like West Virginia, which is, people think of more as a conservative state, is trying to pass legislation, and we'll see if that gets accomplished or not, but trying to make it more difficult or track homeschoolers more closely as well.
Right.
So yeah, forever vigilant. What are some of the ways that you see, besides, what other threats do you see? I mean, I know that they're trying to get more and more homeschoolers to register. What are some other things that might not be on our radar that we need to start paying attention to?
Well, I think that a really important thing is to remember that homeschooling as a movement began when parents decided to kind of divorce themselves completely from the government education system. One of the big reasons that homeschooling has succeeded is because, especially amongst the Christian homeschooling community, we look to the Lord for Him to help us in our family life, to raise, nurture, and educate our children. But then we also look to each other as private associations, all these associations we've been talking about, state organizations, curriculum providers, groups of, families getting together. We didn't look to the government to help us get off the ground. And that organic, natural growth over all these years has led to a completely different educational model that's completely separate from the government. And state after state right now, the momentum is high, are adopting laws providing taxpayer money to people for things that we used to be doing on our own, and, depending on ourselves and each other. So they call them educational savings accounts. I've written about this a lot, and I would say that it's a misnomer because nobody's saving any money. It's basically the government's taking money from everybody so they can redistribute the money to somebody they like. And some of the people they give the money to, we like too, but
Yeah.
I would never disparage any parent's choice, to pursue lawful means, but as a principal matter, bringing the government back into homeschooling is probably a mistake in my view, and maybe a long-term threat, because, and we're already starting to see it, the cost of private education is going up, as it will when you put more money into it. And it's also going to be leading to more regulation. If people are taking money, the government probably has an interest in making sure how it's spent, and that will invite more regulation over time. So part of my message as I go around the country is to say, hey, listen, we built this beautiful thing without government help. Let's keep it that way.
Yeah. When I'm seeing, I know Arizona has a lot of issues with it. Their budget has blown up, so it's not alignment with good economic policy, and whoever pays the piper, picks the tune. So it's it is an encroachment on our freedom, and some people don't quite understand that yet. And there's Arizona is now saying that they're only going to reimburse you or only use a system called Class Wallet, which is a private equity company. They're having this kind of group, this dollars that's being associated with them. They're taking 3% or 10% of all those ESA funds to manage it, and you have to be in their system, and you have to already start bowing down to whatever regulation and paperwork that they want you to fill out to be eligible. So it's not a slow slope. It's a fast slope. And I even see it as, just as someone who is a conservative and wants to have accountability in our government, the idea of distributing funds without strings, which many people are advocating for, I think is the opposite of good government. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Well, I guess as I was a fiscal conservative before I was married and had kids and began homeschooling, and you just have to say that when the government is, taxation is the way the government, funds itself, and it only happens, getting really into the weeds, I guess, taxation is a coercive event where the government extracts your money against your will. And we go along with it because, we need government and we want government to do certain things. And when government gets out beyond the banks of those things that government was actually designed to do and starts redistributing wealth to favored classes of people, it leads to mischief. And I think you're absolutely right that, if the government is appropriating money for certain causes, it has an interest in making sure that it is being spent the way it wants it to be spent.
Hey everyone, I want to briefly interrupt this program to tell you about one of our newest Copper Lodge Library releases, Pride and Prejudice. It is a resource that our families read in the Challenge program. Our Classical Conversations multimedia company has produced this new Copper Lodge edition of this beloved, beautiful book that so many of us love and enjoy. Me not being one of those as a teenage male, not my favorite one that my mom required me to read, but as an adult, I definitely appreciate the story much more. And it's a beloved classic novel. And the wonderful thing about the Copper Lodge Library books is it has footnotes that include, definitions, pronunciations, historical context, and really just helps bring the story to life. as well as wide margins so that students can take notes and really have that conversation with the author. And I bet I would have enjoyed these books much more as a teenage male had I had these details provided for me in the books that I was reading. So students will be discussing Pride and Prejudice inside of our Classical Conversations communities. And of course, for those who might not be in CC, it's a wonderful book that you should include in every curriculum. So you can learn more about the Copper Lodge Library series at copperlodgelibrary.com and go to classicalconversationsbooks.com to purchase one today. Now back to the show. Now tell us, you have a podcast. How often is it? What do you talk about on the HSLDA podcasts? If people like listening to mine, I'm sure they like listening to yours as well.
Yeah, so I talk to interesting people in the homeschooling world, and it varies from people who have started new homeschooling groups, people who have written books. I just interviewed a professor who had written a book about homeschooling, Regent law professor. I sometimes interview new generations of homeschooling, so second generation homeschoolers who are now homeschooling their own children and have taken an active role in starting new groups, things like that. Pretty broad ranging guests, people. The way I introduce the podcast is I get to talk to interesting people about things that interest me in the homeschooling world, and that's sort of our guiding principle.
Now I know I'm a second generation homeschooler. There's more and more of us. What are you guys seeing at HSLDA for these second generation homeschoolers? Are you seeing a significant portion, of people like myself who were homeschooled growing up and enjoyed it, homeschooling again? And one of the things I always say is I'm parenting my kids for the first time, right? I have a 9, 7, and 4-year-old. I've never parented kids that age before, especially 3 of them all at the same time. So I kind of have the confidence that homeschooling works because it worked for me. But I don't necessarily have, I don't necessarily have all that wisdom and knowledge that my mom had or that she gained all over these years. So what differences and what's the mentality of these second generation homeschoolers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'm kind of a 1.5 generation homeschooler in the sense that my kids didn't come along. I have never lived in a state where that was, difficult legally to homeschool, but we started homeschooling before there were a lot of resources available to families, but there were some. And so today's homeschooling children, I think, the second generation homeschooling their children now, there is a really well-established homeschooling ecosystem of groups and curriculum, and the advent of the internet. There's the ability to do. I mean, today, contrary to when I was beginning to homeschool, you had to really kind of ferret out resources, but they were there. But it was not easy necessarily to find exactly what you were looking for. Today, today's second generation or third generation homeschoolers have the opposite problem. There's so much stuff, it's hard to sort out, from everything you have, what is going to work the best for you and your family. And one thing I really appreciated in my travels this summer, one of the conferences, the smallest conference that I attended, and it was pretty small. The state organization had actually kind of struggled, and then through COVID, everything being closed, they didn't have a conference for several years. And last year, it was the second generation homeschoolers who are now homeschooling their own children that revived the conference. And so this year, I spoke at it. It was half again as big as it was last year. And I would say that just in terms of spirit and positive outlook, it was the best. It was the best experience in that sense, because here were these late 20s, early 30s kids who had kind of remembered the cause of liberty and how they got there and why homeschooling is important, and they were excited and energized and energetic. It was really amazing, and I see that in other conferences too. There's a lot of younger people who were themselves homeschooled participating. We see that out in our legislative work too. Surprising number of. So it used to be when I'd go to a state capitol day, you'd have a legislator who was homeschooling their children come and speak. And then lately, you would have a legislator who was homeschooled would come to speak.
Right.
And now they have people who were homeschooled and are homeschooling their own kids and are in, the legislature. So we're seeing it in lots and lots of ways that the second generation is making a difference.
Yeah, we have a number of homeschoolers in all legislative branches here in North Carolina, and even one of our senators in the federal branch is a homeschooling dad, and has been on our NCHE, our homeschool board, in the past. I don't know if he is currently. So it's been really cool to see the kind of rise of homeschooling. And yeah, it was, like you said, like when I was being homeschooled, everyone was like, well, what is that? And now people probably work with homeschoolers, know homeschoolers, or even were homeschooled for a year or so on their own. I think I saw some statistic that not counting like people who public schooled at home during COVID, but that like 1 in 8, or maybe it was 1 in 6 of Gen Zers will have been homeschooled at some point in their life, which is just incredible to think. I'm sure there was probably about 100,000 of us in the United States when I was getting started being homeschooled in the mid 80s or late 80s. So, and you probably remember 10,000 homeschoolers or less time here in our country. So the Lord has definitely blessed it. And I think we need to, like I said, remain vigilant in keeping the government out. There's not any good to be done with inviting in people who don't love our children and have really no interest other than economics to making sure that they're good tax-paying citizens, and homeschooling parents have done a really good job with that on their own. Talk a little bit about like the importance of statistics and research maybe in HSLDA and defending homeschoolers. Like, is that important that we have strong research in our sphere?
It was absolutely essential, especially in the early days, as the question that everybody asked was, how can this mom who's not been to education, school, and college teach her own children? And the early research especially demonstrated that that parents who choose to homeschool were doing an excellent job academically. And then the question that we all get asked, the second question, what about socialization? Well, there's been an awful lot of research done about homeschoolers as they enter adulthood. Some of the most important research, is tracking homeschooled children as they enter college and the workforce, and discovering that, surprise, surprise, homeschooled children are actually more ready to enter the workforce and college in many cases because of the background. Homeschooling isn't, all of us 6-year-olds go and sit in a classroom in lines and rows, and we walk together to the cafeteria. I mean, homeschool, and then you do that for 12 years. Homeschool kids grow up in multi-generational environments. They pursue their own interests. They become more self-sufficient, self-directive, learn how to take on responsibilities earlier, and are extremely well socialized and prepared to take on adult life. And there are numerous studies for that. And, ongoing validation that it works. Brian Ray at the National Home Education Research Institute is continuing to do really important research. And now lots of other people are doing research as well. And so far, about the worst thing that they've been able to say about homeschooling is, well, it appears that homeschoolers do at least as well as everybody else, if not better. And that's the very that's the very worst thing anybody can say.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not a bad place to be, and I know it's super good to be able to see that, because I know a lot of dads can be skeptical, but being able to show them the research, behind what their wife can do,
Right.
is a powerful way to move forward. So if people want to join HSLDA or learn more about just the services and things that you have going on, like what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Our website would be the best, hslda.org. That's HSLDA for Homeschool Legal Defense Association. If you're not already a member and you're just starting homeschooling, I'd suggest you go to your state law pages, where we have really handy guides for how you should, what you need to do in your state, as well as if you're a member, we have forms available for you to use that we have vetted and are sure, are in full compliance with state laws. I think it's really important for people to realize that HSLDA, while we do provide legal assistance one family at a time, that legal assistance is for a greater purpose, and that is to keep homeschooling free for all of us. And we do that by helping thousands of homeschoolers every year. And then, as I mentioned, every once in a while, things bubble up, like they did in Virginia with the Sosby case, that one family that we helped changed the way school districts in America or in Virginia approach the homeschooling legal questions. So being involved with us and with your state organizations, your local groups, we're more of a cause than we are just an educational choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we pray that you never need to use HSLDA, but the best way to never need to use HSLDA is to be a member of your state organizations and a member of HSLDA, because they can be that point of the sphere and always making sure that what we are able to do is free and legal, and that's gonna be your kind of your insurance. You get your car insurance, you get your house insurance. Hopefully, you never use it, but they're not really doing anything for you. When you're not using it. Groups like HSLDA, they're doing stuff for you behind the scenes, 24/7, and yep, still thousands of cases a year that you all see, because it might be legal, but that doesn't mean bureaucrats don't want to take more power into themselves. So, Jim, thanks so much for everything you're doing at HSLDA. Everyone go to hslda.org and become a member today.
Thanks, Robert. It's been a real pleasure being here with you today.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode with Jim Mason, the president of HSLDA. As the school year starts, I would encourage you to join. It's an important organization to be a part of, and they do a lot of good work for all of us behind the scenes. Even if you don't homeschool, if you want to support the freedom movement, become a donor of HSLDA today. In the meantime, keep listening to our show, share it with a friend, and until next time, God bless.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.